Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today I have another collage page in my art journal for you, but first I'm going to make a collage paper. I really like this technique because it gives you a really interesting background paper for collages, and it is fun to play, I would say. I'm starting on some old book paper that I have added a thin layer of gesso, super thin. In some areas there is no gesso, in some areas there is a bit more. And here I stamped the grid stamp from the Pencil Marks number 4 with acrylic paint just randomly over my paper, and with the rest of the paint I just dip it into it to get a more random texture. And also this paper will give a nice collage paper for future projects. I let the paint dry almost completely because I want to have it as kind of a resist effect against the thinner acrylic paint that I'm adding now. I have the golden fluid acrylics here, and I have quinacridone gold, and I mix it a little bit more with water and then also apply it randomly to the paper with a brush. And here you can, or maybe you can't see, but you will see it with another color. The yellow paint that I've used with the stamp is kind of a resist against that liquidy acrylic paint, and that gives that interesting texture. I will add other colors in my next steps, and these will show up a bit more because the quinacridone gold and the yellow are pretty similar. I let these layers dry in between, not 100%. Here you can see I have some puddles of that wet watery ink there. I don't mind that because that gives me a nice mixture, but most of the paint is dry. In my next step I'm using quinacridone magenta from Liquitex. It's an acrylic ink, it's very fluid, and here you can see how the yellow still pops through this ink. And I'm playing intuitively. I just blot down that color randomly, and I try not to cover the whole paper. I want to have still some of the white areas left. I let this dry again, almost full, just some puddles are left with wet ink. And in my next step I'm adding Payne's Gray ink from Sennelier as a contrast. I wanted to have a neutral darker color to make everything more interesting. While this paper is drying, I will create another simple collage paper with one of the brand new stamps that are available today in our shop. They are 10% off until next week Friday, so maybe you want to have a look. What I'm having here is another old book paper that I've used to clean my brayer from the jelly plate, and I'm stamping this leaf stamp just with black ink onto it. Now it's time to start with the art journal page. I'm working in my mini journal that I only use for collages. It's a super cheap sketchpad from the Action store, which has not very good quality paper in it. So I love to use this for collages because then I get an additional layer onto the page. And here you can see how pretty this paper turned out, and it might not look very good as a whole piece, but if you tear it into smaller pieces and use it as a collage paper, it adds really nice texture to your work. I also grabbed a dark piece of old book paper that I had left over. I just used some leftover paint plus the tree stamp from the Cuff collection number 4, and I really like that dark contrast against the bright, colorful paper. I'm adhering everything with the Tombow glue stick. It's my favorite glue stick because it does not give you tons of glue to the back of your paper, and it also does not make your paper buckle. And you have also almost 30 seconds, I would say, to just remove it and place it in another area. And I had never had a paper fallen off my work with this glue. I will also add in a piece of this stamped collage paper. It gives me some interesting pattern and also some lighter tones. I will just cut off the edge where I have no writing on it. I always get asked how I plan my composition and how I know where to place the papers. I usually do this intuitively. I lay the papers down and then I have a look through my camera, or I take a step back so I have some distance, and that makes it easier to see where a paper looks good. But there are a lot of rules about composition. One is the rule of thirds. So you cut everything into thirds and place your focal images or your layers there. And I think with this composition, it almost is the rule of thirds, either horizontally or vertically. Here I'm cutting off the edges of the collage papers. When I'm done adhering the papers, I often have a look at it and think about if I should add more or some smaller pieces. And here I would say no, I don't need anything more. I want to add even more texture with some stamps, and I'm using also one from the brand new Mix It Up number 3 set. It's just a texture stamp with some different sizes of dots, and I'm stamping them onto my page. I'm using black ink here, and as I'm working over acrylics, I use StayZone ink because that dries super fast on every kind of surface. I also would like to have some white stamping as a contrast. Stamping with white is pretty difficult with an ink pad, I would say. I like to use acrylic paint also for stamping, and here I'm using another stamp from that same set, and I just use it with some white acrylic paint. If you're stamping with acrylic paint, of course you have to make sure not to let the paint dry on your stamp, because then it's really hard to get it off. In case it happens that your paint dries, you can use alcohol to remove it, and you can also just lay it into water a while and then brush the paint off the stamp. You will get it clean. It's not a big problem, it's just a bit time consuming. But I recommend, if you use a stamp with paint, just then when you're done, throw it into water and clean it in your sink. Or if you're working on multiple things, you can just lay it upside down onto a wet wipe while you're working, so your paint does not dry in between. I'm just stamping that image onto my scrap paper, so I have some more texture on this piece that I can use on future projects. I'm adding some white splatters to my page because I think that makes it look more vibrant because of the contrast. And while the splatters are drying, I'm stamping one of our new sentiment stamps, and I use one of my collage papers that I did with a similar technique and with similar colors. Of course, you can use the one that you made for this page, but I just had this one left over, and I picked just this one to stamp my words. And as always, I'm using Stays On because I'm stamping over acrylic paint. If I would stamp to watercolor paper or any porous surface, I would use the VersaFine Clear ink. I'm cutting my words apart to use them later on my art journal page. I also have prepared a main image for my spread, which comes also with the Mix It Up stamp set, and it's this little coneflower. I have embossed it in white to black cardstock, and then I cut it out. And I think it makes the perfect contrast against the background. Finally, I'm adhering everything to my spread. Yes, and that's my finished page. I hope you like it, and I hope you enjoyed the video and you are inspired to create something on your own. Don't forget to check out our new stamp sets. Yeah, and I wish you a wonderful weekend. Bye!